Welcome to the Texas News Podcast, where we dive into all things Texas politics and the future of independence in the state of Texas. On today's show, we're going to be discussing our ongoing legal battle with the Texas Republican Party and how we are working to ensure that you get a vote on TEXIT. Additionally, we're going to be tearing apart a piece of propaganda from the San Antonio Current and talk about some very interesting developments out of New Hampshire. So don't go anywhere. All right, folks. Well, again, welcome back to the Texas News Podcast. I got to tell you, it's been a bit of a week since we were last together. We have been in the throes of a battle with the Republican Party of Texas because the Republican Party of Texas is trying to circumvent the law and trying to deny you your vote on TEXIT. Now, on the last podcast, we talked a lot and kind of walked through the rejection that came from the Republican Party of Texas. But today, while I'm going to recap a good bit of that, what I'm going to do is lay some of the groundwork for you, some context about our litigation, and then I'm going to talk you through what that has looked like so far. And I may get into a little bit of what it could look like moving forward. And so to our detractors out there who believe that, because Matt Rinaldi was able to successfully circumvent the law, or so far successfully circumvent the law, those that think that we're down for the count just don't understand how hard we fight for this. I mean, literally. I've been at this since 1996. The TNM's been at it since 2005. They, as I said on the last episode of the podcast, there's absolutely no way that we don't fight this to the bitter end, because our ultimate goal is to get Texans a vote on Texas independence. And really, it's not a vote, it's the vote on Texas independence. I guess our opposition just doesn't understand lateral thinking, or they just really don't understand what our ultimate goal is, right? This is a step in the direction of that goal, okay? But before I get too much into that, let me just talk a little bit as a recap and start setting the stage for you so you can understand what has transpired. So as we talked about on the last episode of the podcast, we got a rejection letter from the state party chair, Matt Rinaldi, rejecting our petition on two very faulty premises, right? Number one, he said that the petition was not timely filed. And number two, he said that electronic signatures didn't count. Now, I would encourage you, because I'm not going to go into rebutting those two things all over again, right? But the fact of the matter is, we entered into the petition campaign in full compliance with the law, and it is Matt Rinaldi who refused to acknowledge the Texas election code. And as I talk through this, you're going to understand just how the political establishment treats the law like a cafeteria plan, and hopefully give you some much broader context about why we're in the mess that we're in right now, why the Republican Party in Texas is so ineffective in fighting against the federal government. So just on that timeline, we got the rejection letter late on the 27th, right? Long after business hours had closed. Chairman Rinaldi sent it to an email address, sent it to me on an email address that no longer exists, right? It was literally my campaign email address from 2012. And my business email address, which I had absolutely no reason to check after the close of business hours. But we found out about it on Twitter, right? That's how we found out about the rejection. And ultimately, we were able to hunt that letter down. And it was an open letter posted on the Texas GOP website. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not how you properly notice anyone, right? So I want you to keep that in mind. And I want you to keep in mind that the deadline issue is dead because Matt Rinaldi actually admitted such on the Chris Salcedo show, right? He got tangled up in his own lie about the filing deadline. And then the digital signature issue is one that we have expressed. But beyond that, I want you to really focus in on the day that he let us know, okay? Because this is going to be extremely important. And oddly enough, I'm going to use another candidate's case in the Texas Supreme Court to point this out to you, okay? So let's roll it back. We delivered the petitions on the 11th. But we did not hear from Rinaldi until well after hours. It was almost 9 p.m. On the 27th, which effectively makes it the business day, the 28th. So immediately we get the letter, and we begin this process of we've got to handle the legal research on the rejections. We got to start tuning up the attorneys. It's not an easy process. Anyone who thinks like this is like going and, filing a small claims case against your neighbor because their dog keeps crapping in your yard has no idea what they're talking about. It's a very difficult process. And particularly when you're dealing with election law in Texas, especially at the level of the primaries. If you're past the primaries and on a lot of issues, the Secretary of State is kind of your target. Okay. But when it comes to these primaries, there's a lot of pieces in play here, right? You've got the chairman who has certain duties with regard to applications. You've got county filing authorities for offices that don't extend beyond county boundaries. Then when they deal with the printing of the ballots, they actually contract out with the county election clerks typically to handle that aspect of it. And then there's this other tie-in where the chairman has to certify the entire ballot to the Secretary of State. There's these deadlines. There's one deadline in the Texas Election Code that sets ballot challenges at 50 days before the primary election. There's another one that the federal courts have imposed upon Texas that essentially says, oh, no, you got to get it actually printed sooner than that because military ballots, right? So all of this shifting sand. So understand that we go into this fight. Number one, we had to wait beyond the reasonable amount of time, right? He didn't notice us. According to statute, it's 5 days or as soon as practicable if the petition comes in before 5 days, before the deadline. As soon as practicable, he had three options, right? His three options. Accept the notarized statements from the petition circulators, or number two, take a sample size and verify that sample size, or number three, verify all of them, which none of those three things apparently were done. Otherwise, in his rejection letter, he would have been able to cite specific numbers or specific percentages, but he failed to do that. So it was clear on the 28th that Rinaldi and team already had a plan in motion. You see, because it wasn't until we went public with the notice that our board of directors had authorized legal action to force Rinaldi to do his damn job, right? Wasn't until then that this letter comes out. So it was already very clear that stonewalling was a big part of their strategy to deny you your voice. That's gamesmanship. That's gamesmanship. They are gaming the system to suppress your vote on TEXIT. I want you to understand what that means. That means that when Jeff Leach, State Representative Jeff Leach and Jerry Patterson call you traitors, right? Or you have committee chairmen like former State Representative Chris Patty, who would not even bring the Texas Independence Referendum Act for a hearing in committee. Those types of actions to prevent you from even being heard were committed by Matt Rinaldi, the chairman of the state Republican Party. Now, I know there are people out there who think that Matt Rinaldi is this conservative champion. But when you do establishment things, You are a part of the establishment. And when you do what Matt Rinaldi did, you are violating Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution. Our people have a right to be heard on this issue. We did everything right. Everything right. From filing it by the statutory deadline to the acceptance of the electronic signatures, which is very clear in the law when it says that if a law requires a signature, an electronic signature satisfies the law. That's not me making this crap up. That is not some opinion from anyone. That is the law. There was even a precedent for this set in June of 2023 when a federal judge enjoined the Secretary of State from upholding paper petition statutes in the Texas Election Code. So it's not like this is unusual. And you know, we have this interview with Matt Rinaldi explaining his rationale for it, saying that, it'll bring out voters. Putting Texas on the ballot will undoubtedly bring out voters. Thank you let me just go ahead and thank Matt Rinaldi for reinforcing our position, essentially saying what we've been saying all along. Of course, it's also what the international experts say, that independence questions drive voter turnout. And so he gave a rationale for why they didn't want it on the ballot. It'll bring out the wrong ones. He wants to make the election about a certain set of issues. He said them: the Paxton impeachment, school choice, and the border. But guess what? It's not up to him. Well, apparently it is. In his mind, it is. To see what this election's going to be about, to set the boundaries for this election, to disenfranchise people that followed the law. I just want you to, before I move on, I just want you to understand the kind of person that you're dealing with. So for all of you that have sent me messages and said, but I thought Matt Rinaldi was a good guy. You know what kind of a tree it is by the fruit it bears. You understand someone by their actions. And if his actions work in concert to ignore the law, selectively pick and choose, that is functionally no different than what we are fighting right now in the political establishment from the federal government. You know, it seems that while, where Matt Rinaldi's concerned, while you can take the boy out of Connecticut, you can't take the Connecticut out of the boy. It's federal. That's what it feels like. And that federal mentality, that federal mindset has crept into Texas government. And this is one of the things that we have said all along. TEXIT breaks the back of the political establishment. It uproots this federal mindset of these people who treat Texas as a farm club for federal government. It rips that cancer out by the roots and gives them no place to lay root again. And that's why they fight it so hard. So our first step, we began the scramble on the 28th. But understand what we were up against, right? What was the 28th? Well, the 28th was a Thursday leading into a holiday weekend, right? So we had Thursday to scramble. We had Friday, sort of, because let's be honest, a lot of people in the legal profession, they were taking Friday anyway, right? They were taking Friday. So then you had the 30th, which is a Saturday. Nobody's working. The 31st, nobody's working. The 1st, which was a holiday, and so you had the 2nd, right, was when we could commence working on this. And I'm going to tell you, the team that we had to assemble for this, we worked throughout that weekend as best we could, given where everyone was as we began to decompress Rinaldi's rejection, begin to look at the case law that specifically dealt with his rejection. We went through all of it, right? I mean, while many of you were out there popping corks on champagne and shooting off fireworks and doing your things, we were knuckling down to get this done, talking to lawyers all over the country. And that's a story that, honestly, that period of time deserves a book. Just literally this one fight over these days deserves a book. I mean, it does. I'm not going to write it because I'm not. I write books out of necessity, not because I want to, but because people ask me too many questions and I just want to get it memorialized. But as we proceeded into this, the first thing right out of the gate we did was we filed an emergency petition with the Texas Supreme Court. And given how short the time frame was, it was important that we jump this straight to the Supreme Court. We could not risk the timeline of taking it to the Third Court of Appeals. We had to go straight to the Supreme Court. Now, what's interesting about that is the Supreme Court already had some election challenges in front of it. There was one that was already happening related to a sitting Supreme Court justice. You actually had one that had been filed quite some time before in the Second Court of Appeals. But it's pretty instructive if you look at that case that was filed at the Supreme Court. It's going to help give you some context for what's going on. And I'm actually going to read some excerpts from Rinaldi's response in that case. But here are the broad strokes of the case. So you have a sitting Supreme Court Justice, John Devine, who was on the, obviously he's an incumbent, he's running again. And then you have a challenger named Walker who, again, I'm not getting into the merits of one candidate or the other because I don't really care about that right now. But effectively what had happened is, and if you don't know how judicial races work here in Texas, they pay their filing fee, but they also must have an accompanying petition that goes along with it, okay? So there's the nexus. They must have a petition that goes along with their filing fee. And it's really interesting that Texas requires not just I guess you'd call it a filing fee, right? But they also, for judicial candidates, require this petition that accompanies it. Most offices allow you to do one or the other, but in this instance, and for judicial candidates, it's both. They got to pay money, plus they have to go to each judicial district and they have to get 50 signatures. Okay. So that is essentially what had happened. Now, Devine, as soon as the window opened up, he applied, filed his application to be on the Republican Party primary ballot. And Rinaldi accepted that application on December the 1st. Now, when the challenger, Walker, got a hold of the petition, he found out, he said, wait a minute, there are signatures on here that should not be on here. Okay? So one of the rules is that if you sign one candidate's petition, you cannot sign the other candidate's petition. And so that's a law. I mean, that's just part of the process. So Walker, through his attorney, was able to point out that many of the signatures were defective and say, look, here's all these defective signatures, which drops Devine below the threshold of 50 signatures. And as such, he cannot be on the ballot. But here's what Rinaldi said in his response to this challenge that Walker had to try to get Devine knocked off the ballot. He says on December 27th, Walker informed Rinaldi that he believed Devine's application failed to include a sufficient number of valid signatures from individuals living within the 8th Court of Appeals Judicial District. In Walker's view, this purported defect required Rinaldi to remove Devine from the Republican primary ballot. Rinaldi determined that Devine's application met the code's requirements and refused to remove Devine from the primary ballot. So what you have here is Walker, before he filed the suit, actually went to the RPT and said, wait a minute, these signatures are bad, they are defective, and I can prove they're defective. And in fact, in the lawsuit, he specifically gives the names that are defective. And here's how he knew they were defective: because they had signed his petition first. You see, Walker got more than the 50 signatures, right? He got more than that. He was able to point out specifically the ones that were defective, that they said, look, this person signed both. And that means the signature is invalid. The statute is crystal clear, right? But again, it said Rinaldi determined that Devine's application met the code's requirements and refused to remove Devine from the primary ballot. So think about that for a moment. Think about it in the context of what our suit is. So Rinaldi, when given fact, plain law, very clear law, shot a big middle finger to that law and said, you know what? I don't care what the law says. I'm going to do what I want to do. And so Walker tried to work through the party, right? Tried to go and say, look, this is the problem. You know, this is the issue that I've got. And you know, I'm sure that there might be some rationale there where somebody would want to go and say, look, it'd be a lot easier for Walker if he didn't have an opponent on the ballot. I mean, I get how the political game is played, right? But at the end of the day, Rinaldi, who is a guy who has told many people, and it's gotten back to me, and said, look, I don't want to hold my thumb on the scales of this thing. Clearly is not opposed to holding his thumb on the scales, right? So Walker has to go. Once Rinaldi shoots the middle finger and says, you know what, I don't care what the law says. He says, okay, he leaves Walker one choice, and that is to sue. And to file this suit in the Texas Supreme Court. And why the Texas Supreme Court and not, say, the Third Court of Appeals? Because time was short. You see, Rinaldi also, in his response, accused Walker of trying to, what he said was gamesmanship, that he didn't file his suit timely. He said, you've known about this for a long time and you didn't file your suit timely. And so you're just trying to game the calendar. And then he starts all this hand-wringing and crying and whinging and all that about, but the primary election's already begun. So Rinaldi's response, as part of it, this is what he says. The primary has already begun. As Walker concedes, ballots are about to be printed. Texans have been able to apply for ballots by mail since New Year's Day. And early voting is set to begin in mere weeks. Indeed, the Texas Secretary of State recommends completing your ballots not later than the 60th day before Election Day, which is Friday, January 5th, 2024. So I want you to now understand, for those of you out there that are trying to get a grasp over this calendar and understand why things took so long, I hope you understand now. It's not our fault. It was, in fact, Rinaldi and his failure to do his job and gaming the calendar, the very same thing that he accused Walker of doing, he did to you. He waited until late on the 27th so that it wouldn't hit inboxes till the 28th. That left effectively 2 days, right? Because you read it there. He's like, hey, we're going to get this thing done. And he talks about the Texas Secretary of State recommending that they complete the ballots not later than January 5th. But here's what I know, because we have people over there. They were rushing to try to get these things submitted before January the 3rd, so that effectively Rinaldi could punt. And there is a strategy to the punt. And the strategy is this. The strategy is that once he punts it to the Secretary of State, if we go challenge him, he gets to say, oh, sorry, I'm not your guy anymore. It's the Secretary of State who handles that ballot issue. And the Secretary of State, if we go to sue the Secretary of State, not much they can do, because that is the ballot that was certified by the party chairman. So while everyone is scrambling about this printing deadline, ultimately the play here was to deny you your right to essentially lie, ignore the law, and push it up against the calendar so nothing could happen. So that led us to file an emergency petition directly with the Supreme Court. And almost immediately, and without reason whatsoever, the Texas Supreme Court denied the emergency petition. They rejected it. No reason given, no rationale whatsoever given. Now, we understand that in filing that there was going to be some questions of fact, right? Which is one of the things the Supreme Court, Texas Supreme Court, can't deal with on issues like this if there is a challenge of the facts. And but you got to go plant your flag first. And so almost immediately, it was denied. Like, they didn't even have time to get it on the website before they rejected it. And it's interesting that it's a rejection, because I will tell you, it happened so quickly, and the way things are in the Supreme Court, I don't know that they even looked at it. Maybe other than to see that it was us trying to get the, some help to get some justice, and to get the Republican Party of Texas chairman to follow the law. Yeah, that happened. And so, you gotta ask yourself, over here on one side, Rinaldi wants to let petitions slide that are obviously defective, but on ours that clearly follows the letter of the law, he's willing to make things up and ignore the law. I don't know. I don't know what was on the Supreme Court's mind, because they surely didn't have a chance to look at the merits of it, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I'll talk more about that later. But I want you to understand that context. So that was the first thing. We had to get our flag planted. But step two was taking the fight to district court, right? Because, again, we're on a very crunched timeline to get this thing done. And according to this, and particularly Rinaldi's response, they pushed us up against the wall with no time whatsoever. They basically gamed the calendar to keep you from being able to do a damn thing about what he did to you, right? So we next filed a case in district court, essentially asking for a temporary restraining order on ballot printing for the purposes of getting this, let's adjudicate this. Look, take a pause, take this up on emergency. And when you take it up on emergency, we'll go in the next 24 hours. We will each lay out our side, and then you can determine whether to issue a TRO and halt the ballot printing until we resolve this issue, or you kick us out, right? But we want our day in court. We want our day that we did not get with the Texas Supreme Court for whatever rationale that was. So the court comes back, says, hey, all right, this is an emergency. We understand it's an emergency. The earliest we can get to you is the 16th, which is one day beyond the last day to file ballot challenges. You see, they kind of shot you the bird there. They shot it to us all. We actually saw this happen when candidate Kerry DeMoore, who is endorsed by Paxton, challenged one of the candidates' residency in the SD30 race. And we watched the Second Court of Appeals punt the hearing beyond the deadline, right? You see this in these election challenges when these judges don't want to deal with them. And the reason, I don't know what the reason is. I can speculate, but the bottom line is, as of the taping of this podcast, we're looking at our additional options, right? We're trying to determine at this very moment whether we go in and try to fight this on another in that district court case, if we can essentially restructure it. But we're having a lot of conversations, and as I said before, what we are doing with this is multi-pronged. It's multi-step. There are a lot of things going on. This is Supreme Court was step one, district court is step two, but it's not the final arrow in our quiver, because ultimately, however this goes down, if they ultimately deny and suppress the will of 139,456 Texans who expressed their desire under law and followed the law to have this question put on the ballot, then that speaks volumes about things that have to be done next, right? So you've got, on this one side, you've got this legal fight that's going to play out, and it's not just the Supreme Court. It's not just the district court. And frankly, now this goes beyond the TEXIT issue on the March ballot, right? Because I'm going to tell you, the way that the political establishment is scrambling right now to shut this down at every single solitary turn in the courts, to deny you justice, to deny justice for all of us, to pick and choose from the law. What that tells us is that ultimately, if they deny us justice on this and we don't get it on the March 2024 ballot, understand where we go from here. And that's part of what I want to talk about, because as these legal issues play out and the strategy moves forward, we need to not solely focus on this particular suit, because remember, this is not just about getting a vote on TEXIT. Our ultimate goal is to get and win the vote on TEXIT. And so the thing that we've got to do here is channel all of that energy and all of that momentum. While this plays out in the courts, we've got to channel that all into the other prongs of this fight. And I don't mean at the courthouse. I mean in the court of public opinion. Because of the shenanigans of the Texas GOP, pretty doggone clear for what we've got to do, right? I mean, their shenanigans mean that we have to continue to focus on building the other aspects of this campaign. This was never a one and done thing. You gotta remember, you gotta put everything in context. What was the purpose of the TEXIT petition campaign? To be able to get Texans a vote on this issue on a real deal ballot. That's what it was. But it wasn't just about that alone, because at the end of the day, that doesn't get us TEXIT. It builds momentum. It builds political capital. It pushes the issue forward. But that was not the only one. I mean, how ridiculous is it to have a single bullet in your gun? I mean, you don't go to war like that. That's dumb. That just means you're Barney Fife off the Andy Griffith Show, and they only give you one bullet because they're afraid of what you're going to do with it. But we're multi-prong on this thing. And so you got to understand, as we get ready, it's already happening. I don't even want to say get ready, because it's already happening. You understand that you have in most areas of Texas at this point, you have the ability to create what is essentially a proxy vote for TEXIT. Now, we talked about this. We talked about the candidates that have signed the Texas First Pledge, right? And what did they sign? What did that pledge say? These candidates have put their names on a pledge to do everything in their power to give you that TEXIT vote, and not just a vote on a party's primary ballot, but the final vote that we all need to assert our independence, whichever way that it goes. And so it is important right now for you, as I said, to channel that energy, to channel that passion into helping us get these Texas First candidates across the ballot, because here's the bottom line. We go in with a solid cadre, and the Texas Independence Referendum Act gets across the finish line, right? So you cannot squander this opportunity. And look, as we get into these races, these elections, you know, these campaigns for these people, Exhibit A and why Texas First Pledge signers should be elected is what Matt Rinaldi did. Exhibit A in the case in the court of public opinion is 139,456 signatures and 600 and some odd thousand registered supporters. That is the case. That is Exhibit A. That is the thing we hammer these people with over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Because the Matt Rinaldis of the world are not going to stop TEXIT. I mean, you know, it would be lovely if they would get it through their head that there's not a snowball's chance in hell they will ever stop this thing. It is already well underway. Much like Rinaldi said in his letter, the primary has already begun. Guess what? So has TEXIT. The avalanche has already started. It's too late for the pebbles to vote. This is happening. And while they may click their heels that they're causing us some inconvenience with this, understand what they're celebrating. They're celebrating squelching your voice. They're celebrating violating your right to choose how you're governed. They are dancing and celebrating over the fact that they deprived you of a constitutional right. Guess what? I may have just given you a hint for what one of the next steps is. But that being said, you need to go support these Texas First candidates. You need to go to taketexasback.com. You need to find the ones that are nearest you. You need to donate to as many of them as you can. You need to volunteer. You need to help them knock doors. You need to make phone calls for them. And frankly, we need you to do it for us too. We need you to. We need all hands on deck because, guys, this is for all the marbles. I mean, in the context of the world today, TEXIT is the one shining light. It's the hope that we have that we can make it better, that we can do something for Texas, that we can save it from an invasion on the border, that we can, escape this financial abyss that the United States is headed into. I mean, there's so many things. So TEXIT is worth it. I mean, I can't imagine looking at future generations and telling them, you know what, it's not. It's not. You know what, you're not worth it. I will just live out my days in some, hole in the ground and then just let you pick up the piece. I can't imagine telling my kids that. I mean, what kind of a crumb are you? If you could look at your children or grandchildren and say, you know what, it was just too hard. So enjoy your change, Johnny. I mean, how ridiculous is that? I mean, what kind of a person does something like that? Maybe Matt Rinaldi would do that. Who knows? But anyway, we've got to get our candidates across the finish line. So you know what to do. Go to taketexasback.com, get stuck in on those candidates, and right now, head to tnm.me/volunteer and sign up. Become a volunteer for the organization. It's all hands on deck now, folks. This is what the war looks like. Any of you guys who thought that this was a pillow fight, you thought wrong. This is bare knuckles brawling is what this is. And so you better get stuck in, you better get a thick skin, and you better get to work, because that's the only way that we win. All right. Very briefly, before I wrap this thing up, I spent an inordinately large amount of time on that. But before I wrap this up, I gotta address this. So this rag in San Antonio called the San Antonio Current, amongst all of the coverage that's been going on about these, our fight for all of our petition signers, decides that now would be a good time to write. I mean, they're an online tabloid. I mean, I honestly can't even believe I'm responding to this crap, but people keep asking about it, and so I gotta say something, right? So here's the headline. The headline is: Texas nationalist movement is threatening to sue state GOP for leaving TEXIT off primary ballot. Well, news flash. This was, by the way, this article dropped yesterday, January the 11th. News flash to Michael Carlos, the author of this. Genius, we already did. We've already filed suit twice. So, get with the time. This is not news. This is olds, right? Oh, Jesus. So anyway, here's what you got. So he says, last week, the TNM went into a social media meltdown after the Republican Party of Texas refused to allow a question about Texas seceding from the United States on the party's 2024 primary ballot. Well, you don't say. But what's notable here is, I think you need to understand. So the subheading for this is: despite its rabid support from fringe groups, Texas secession is a legal pipe dream, experts say. So I'm not even going to take the time to go through all of this, because frankly, we've debunked it. But I want to specifically point out the language here, right? Because it's important to understand where the opposition, what they think about you and what they want people to think about you. First and foremost, I think it's interesting that, words like rabid, right? I mean, congratulations on, at least having your passion acknowledged in here, but to refer to it as rabid, like an animal with rabies, you see, that's they're programming people to think of you as less than human, right? And notice this thing: despite its rabid support from fringe groups. Well, who are those fringe groups, right? I mean, because we all seem pretty united in the Texas nationalism movement, which is, outside of the two major political parties, the single largest political organization of the state of Texas, right? But so who are these fringe groups? But it's just the inclusion of that word. Remember, when I have said time and time again, this is a weapon of totalitarian regimes, atomization, to isolate us from one another, to marginalize you. And frankly, it's exactly no different than what Matt Rinaldi did, except for one thing, except that Matt Rinaldi publicly acknowledged that this issue drives people to the polls, right? This here makes it sound like a fringe group. And of course, some of the opposition believe that if it goes to the polls, it will be soundly defeated. But yet they fight so hard to keep it off the ballot. You got to ask yourself why you think that is. But then, this nonsense that it's a legal pipe dream, experts say. Well, what's funny is we've got experts who say exactly the opposite. And frankly, I always think it's hilarious. Let's find this here. I'm trying to find Gilson. So yeah, there's where he is. Hang on, I'm going to say. So they go drag out this husk, Cal Gilson, who they've drug out before. He's professor of political science at SMU, and he's like, the Republican Party of Texas doesn't want to offer the opportunity for its primary electorate to express silliness. It would simply draw them into defending something that is not currently defensible and is not a real thing. It's simply not the case under current law and the constitutional interpretation of the country that Texas could secede. Well, poppycock. I mean, what a pile of crap word salad this is, right? Look, I mean, if you don't think it's constant, let's just get it on the ballot. Let the people of Texas speak, and then we'll see what happens, right? If Cal Jilson thinks, and again, experts, I love that experts say they drag him out yet again. Which, by the way, they didn't reach out to us for comment, right? They didn't ask us to chime in on this at all, right? So, again, one-sided debate, setting the frame and the narrative, calling you rabid, calling you fringe, and then calling it a legal pipe dream, which is just so far from the truth. This is what they do. This is the face of the enemy. This is the face of the enemy. This is what they do. This is how they propagandize. Their two weapons that they have, the only tools that they have in their tool bag, are fear and suppression. That's literally it. This article, fear and suppression, Matt Rinaldi suppression, and just so you understand, this is a progressive neo-Marxist rag. And understand that they are behaving in exactly the same way as the Republican Party chairman, Matt Rinaldi. Guys, this guy has it says, send a news tip. Buddy, here's your tip. Maybe get both sides of the story. Maybe give up journalism. Go into open a lemonade stand or something. Maybe you're more suited for that. I don't know. All right, final piece of news before I wrap this thing up. Just right before we are recording this episode of the podcast, I got to witness a live stream from a committee hearing in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. And many of you may remember when we had Carla Garrick on here, interview her. Go look up that podcast. It was great to interview her. And we've had a lot of, there's a relationship between the New Hampshire independence movement, what we're doing here in Texas. We all talk to one another and we all cheer one another on. And so there was this hearing this morning on two pieces of legislation. One is CACR 20, one is HB 1130. I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but here's what effectively they do. They were literally hearing bills in committee this morning. CACR 20 essentially says it's a constitutional amendment that would put to the voters, right? They got to put constitutional amendments to voters like anyone else, but it would essentially create a trigger mechanism in the New Hampshire Constitution that says if the debt gets to $40 trillion, then New Hampshire is withdrawing from the union, right? It's a trigger. So it effectively winds up being a referendum on independence, because does anyone here really think that the federal debt is not going to hit 40 trillion? I heard one of the people testifying today actually say, hey, you guys may want to bump that number up as fast as that dial is moving, because it may be over 40 trillion by the time this bill gets passed. But then the partner to that was HB 1130, and it essentially creates a study committee to study all the aspects. So if you take our legislation with the Texas Independence Referendum Act and separate that part out, the part from our bill that creates this committee to kind of line it out, that's what they're doing. They're creating a study committee here, which is sort of, look, let's let the state work on getting some of these answers to what independence would look like. I think it's a great idea, something that we talked about in the last session and actually with Kyle in the session that HB 1359 was filed. So we'll be looking at a lot of that. But look, best wishes to our friends up there in New Hampshire on this. All the testimony was fantastic. We're going to be posting some of that on the site. I think you may see some of the excerpts from it on social media already. But just great job, guys. We're behind you 100%, and let's go win. Okay. All right, folks. Well, that is a wrap for Texas News for this week. I just want to thank you guys so much for listening week in and week out. And I will leave you with the words that I leave you with every time, the words of Sam Houston when he said that Texas will again lift its head and stand among the nations. I believe that time is now, and the question is, will you stand with her?